holistically serving everybody per se, right? Because they're serving different groups. And so I see a lot of the time, what has been isn't working for what is going to be. So
that's never going to happen. We're all different, aren't they? Actually, having something that works for the whole society just will never work. We've got to accept that. And this is why some of the time, in your case, you need some Republican and sometimes Democrat. So there's a swing backwards and forwards. All politicians, by definition, do things in order to get re-elected. That's just one of those things that's throughout the democratic world. And of course, Trump's only, whether he gets in or not in November or whenever the election is, he's only got one more term after that. So, but he'll try and ensure his successor is also a Republican. So the politics is too short. That's why places like China, although it's obviously too autocratic and it's a state system, at least look longer term. They look at the long-term future. That's why, we're all either mostly worried that China will potentially dominate the world because they're looking at the 50 or 100 or 150-year view. They're not looking to the next election dates.
What I'd love to jump into is the future of business, because one of my mentors once talked to me about look to the future of what's going to happen and build a company for what's going to happen, so you can be at the foundation and you can really have impact within a field or within a segment of the world. And so what I went into mentorship, emotional intelligence, belief intelligence, and education. And we've been, for instance, like this president has been contracting me to, and nobody knows this in the US, which is funny. They might after this podcast, but some media picks it up. But he's been contracting me to train cops around the country with emotional and belief intelligence, and actually how to understand themselves and love themselves. Now, what's interesting about that is not everything that people do, for instance, gets seen all the time. And so I've been doing this for 10 years. I've been training cops, educators, community leaders, and kids. And then 2 years ago, I started my own school district. So we actually are building the human. And once the human gets focused and passionate and wants to achieve something with their life, then everything else goes. The grades go up. The attendance goes up, the behavior gets better, everything. So we've taken kids that are failing the system, and this year I get to graduate 60 kids is within 2 years, right? It's great. Actually, we have 10 last year. So we have 70 kids in 2 years that we graduate because I'm changing the mind. So I'm looking at where the future of, for instance, education is going. It's going digital. It's going project-based learning. So my teachers are now tutors, but they're also project-based learning coaches. So they actually coach our kids to understand how to utilize the content they're learning digitally. So where do you see that going? Because on your website, petercowley.com, I see there's a
petercowley.org.
Oh, sorry, .org. Yes,
is somebody I know who's in media.
Nice. It is .org. I'm looking at it right now. I'm on it. So I see there's a lot of companies that you are on the board of directors and you're involved with. Probably some of them you invest in too. And so where do you see, like, how do you pick companies? How do you get involved? Is it just because you believe in the CEO, or is it because you're looking at, like the VR stuff and what's going to happen and what's rolling out?
Yeah, on my website, there's my whole portfolio. So apart from the charities, I've invested in all those companies, all 75 of them or thereabouts. No, as I'm sure you're aware, and you've talked a lot to other people, and something it took me about 3 or 4 years to learn, I only invest in people. I don't invest in ideas or VR or drug discovery or anything, any hypey thing at all. I just invest in people. Because as we were saying earlier on, businesses pivot, they change, business models change. Only good people will be able to do that. They've got to listen to everything around the market, the people and everything else, the regulators, and look in their crystal ball and work out what the new normal at the moment post-COVID is, etc. And that's why you invest in those people. Now, you wouldn't invest unless they had a business plan, had that idea clearly, because they can't just say, give me the money, which some people occasionally do, because I wouldn't give that money. So I'm investing in them an idea. So in all those cases, I have invested in the people. And in my case, I don't invest generally, very few exceptions, unless there's a team of at least 2 or even 3.
So what do you think about, okay, so you find 2 or 3 rock stars in a company. They have maybe a little bit of traction. what do you think about like COVID-free businesses? Because obviously we have to look at that now. Like if we have COVID 5 more times over the next 10 years, what happens to the business, right?
Absolutely. And the business I'm invested in, and there's still 50 something still existing because some have gone bust and some have exited, they're coping in very different ways. So one of my businesses that was turning over low millions last year is a mask company called Cambridge Mask. You know, imagine what that's like now and what that would be if it was COVID-20 and COVID-21, etc. And then other companies, I've got nothing in hospitality, thank goodness, because hospitality at the moment here in the UK is zero. It's been supported by governments and that's all. So what business will I invest in longer term? I don't know yet. And the reason I say that is because I don't know where you are in terms of lockdown, but we're actually only 3 months into it. Only 3 months? Sounds a long time, but we're 3 months into it. We don't expect it to last forever. If it lasts forever, the globe collapses. If we can't move stuff around and governments will all go bust. So it's very difficult to know at the moment what the new normal is going to be like, and therefore what the businesses that are going to succeed are. So I certainly haven't made any decisions yet only to invest in something that's relevant today in the middle of COVID. However, there will be businesses, like somebody pitched a new airline to me recently. What a crazy idea. Who's going to set up an airline at the moment? We're going to wait for the airline industry to recover, if it does, because it might not do. I've got a friend in Virginia, actually, who's an airline hostess, a stewardess, and she works for United. And, you know, 20,000 stewardesses are furloughed at the moment and all going to be released shortly. You know, she hasn't got a hope of being a stewardess again for the rest of her life. They just, in my view, there won't be that much aircraft. So clearly there are some that are definitely no. But it's not very clear what the new normal is going to be like, and therefore what is a definite yes.
So I'm looking at the Cambridge Mask. It's cambridgemask.com. It looks amazing. You guys are rocking. It says on the front page, we are open for all pre-orders, but we are sold out of stock. That's amazing.
August or September. Exactly. Now, the Cambridge Mask is very different from your average mask because it's really expensive. It's about $50 or $60 because it's got a very special filter in that's come from the defense industry in the UK, which will probably filter out the COVID, because the COVID virus is really small. It's much smaller than many other viruses. But anyway, that was opportunist. I mean, last year he had a normal sort of lifestyle just trucking on, and bang, that's success. But I've got other businesses which have got zero revenue. They've come down from multi-million revenue down to zero because they need access to people's homes, and they're not allowed into people's homes. That will recover, of course. So as I keep saying to people in this sort of situation, we're in the midst of like a war, you know, we're in the midst of something which is really intense, the globe hasn't seen before, but we don't yet know what it's going to look like in 6 months, 12 months, or 3 years' time. If we have multiple COVIDs over the next decade or so, many governments will go bust. I mean, there's no way, or all the standard of livings of everybody in the Western world will come down. It's pretty frightening, man.
So I think everything will get to shift at that point, right? Because people literally, there will be products that we will not need to use in the future that will be done completely different. For instance, like education. Well, we shut down in March, but at the end of the day, we're still getting paid, right? It's great. We're a COVID-free business. So private school funded by the state, but the other schools did that too. I think the difference between us and a lot of other schools where we were already digital, 100% it was about 95% digital, but for the main subjects, kids are still able to get on and, get their work done. So
they're missing out on a very important part of schooling, aren't they? They're missing out on the social aspect of it.
Huge.
We're all human animals, aren't we? We're animals that are sociable. How on earth do we replace that? If people are always zooming into meetings from all over the world, how do they form relationships? How are marriages created out of the workplace? This is not the way forward for society. We've got to work our way through this. So, and then that includes education as well, because I just can't imagine a situation where children of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 or older are just sitting at home, zooming in. A, they won't be able to concentrate, and B, they won't have that social interaction and play. We've got to get past this point.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because if it's not a COVID, then what is it? And if it's, and I think that the disease virus world is one of the only limiting things right now because we have internet, we have electricity, we have roads, we have cars. So, we have a system that is allowing us to do what we do, how we do it. But I look at, 200 years ago, maybe 400 years ago, we were, in little classrooms and little schools. Like our school, our biggest school is 200 kids, right? So we have small community-based schools. So it's interesting to be able to see that I'm not creating a 30-acre school like some other people that I know. I'm creating something that is 3,000 to 5,000 square feet. That's super small classrooms, super high end for students. So it's interesting to look at that on at least with us in the future of education. Let me ask you one more question. What are the keys to creating culture within an organization, and how did you learn it? Did you learn it from a mentor or your parents or experiences? Like, where did you get that from?
Yeah, so my own history is my father, as I said earlier on, was a dentist, actually, a dental surgeon, and he had a small team. He had about 20 people working for him. So he worked from home, he employed his own staff, etc., and did his own marketing. So I saw that when I was growing up. So I saw there was a level of culture, and that was driven by his character, of course. Then I worked in a big corporate for a while, and I could see which was good and which was bad within the organization. Not easily, because I was only 21, 22 years old. Then I moved to Germany and set up my first business. And then it was at that point I started to understand culture more. And of course, like everybody else, we've had mentors, I'm sure you have over the years, and I can identify 4 or 5 that taught me a huge amount about this. Unfortunately, in most cases, because if you go back, because I'm so much older than you, I was pre-internet, so access to this sort of information, the sort of things you can get just by Googling something, wasn't there. So it had to come from human beings or books. It's difficult to teach culture in a book, so it did come from human beings. And I'm confident that the average 25, 28-year-old entrepreneur now will do a much better job at creating culture than I did when this would be in the early 1980s, because there's so much more information out there, whether it's delivered by television or whether it's delivered by accelerator courses or whatever. But in the end, the culture of the business is so, as you know, is so critical to the way it hangs together. And the bad culture is really difficult. So I'm just talking to an entrepreneur today, where she's a CEO, not an entrepreneur at this point, and the culture in the business is really poor. And actually getting that to change. The previous CEO has left, and she's got to rebuild the culture. And particularly during COVID times, where she can't meet anybody, that is proving a real problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think that our kids today necessarily don't know how to build culture if they don't have mentors like you.
Yeah. But I'm saying that it's not as bad as that, I don't think, because there's much more, and I don't just me, obviously, there's plenty of other people around. For a start, there are more entrepreneurs, and assuming that an entrepreneur produces a good culture, which, if they're successful, they almost certainly will have done, they will be able to learn from that. If you go back to when I was growing up, which was in the 60s and 70s, mostly big companies, there were any small companies would tend to be little service companies like my dad. So the concept of building a culture and doing the research on that and then finding people like me, of which there are many more around, is a lot easier than it was a generation ago.
Interesting. Well, I appreciate, 30 minutes of your time today. It's a blessing to have you. I would love to take you out to lunch sometime when I come to the UK.
Vice versa. Where are you in Florida, aren't you? So
I'm in Florida. If you're ever out here, I'd love to take you to lunch. Do you ever get to America?
Yeah, I was supposed to be in Denver and California for 2 weeks, just about 4 weeks ago. So no, I'll definitely be in the States. Well, maybe not this year now because of getting over and back again, but certainly next year I will definitely be. So
that's amazing. I would love to pick your brain if I could ever pick your brain sometime. Love wisdom. We're doing some really great a really great raise this year. The first raise I've actually done, but I'd love to pick your brain sometime on ideas or if you ever want to give any input or wisdom, that'd be amazing.
I have written a book, as you say, called Investor to Investor, and I suggest that if there's an audiobook on Amazon, there's a Kindle obviously version, and there's a printed version which are in some Amazon warehouses in the US. So if you you won't need to really talk because you know a lot anyway, but just flicking through it, I think you learn from the way I'm basically teaching entrepreneurs how to raise money and teaching angels how to be better angels. That was my goal in writing the book, or the books. There's another book as well.
Amazing. I'll autograph it. When I see you, can I have you sign it?
Yeah, of course. Or
I'll,
yeah, exactly.